I was charged with generating a really prevalent, that's what I think it's called, discussion this evening. So I expect good questions, difficult questions, so that we can have a good conversation. So, who would like to open with a question? Yes, I see many hands going up. Please, come now. We've talked about object as evidence, object as reminder. I'm particularly interested personally in this thing of the object as being an agent. It's not just there for us to do things for it, but that actually it helps to constitute us as well. So, let me hear questions. Please, yes, the mic is coming to you.
I am a guide in this museum, so I have a lot of contact with visitors, and I wonder how you envisage this creative role of the museum in the practical contact with the visitors who come here daily and who I see in my job.
Who are you posing that question to? Who particularly you want to answer?
Well,
anyone? It's
anyone.
Fine? All right, who would take up that question? Come now.
I give a response.
Yes, please.
The response is, I have no idea. Many things have to come together. First of all, the scientific department has to give you incentives for presenting the things in such a way. Then a lot depends on the way things are displayed. And I don't think that you will ever have an idea, but anything that can contribute to have these objects strike people rather than please them is already very good, I think. That was my non-answer.
All right, Bambi, yeah?
Well, I know, because as I said, I curated this exhibition last year, and I know from practical experience that it's not at all obvious. And the major fight was actually between myself as the curator of the exhibition and the museologist, obviously. And one of the major criticisms that we got was that there was far too many texts in the exhibition, and that visitors do not want to read that much. Whereas if I guided people through the exhibition, they said that even with all the text, there was still a great many things that they had not understood, and that they were very grateful that I had given additional information. But obviously an exhibition is not an illustrated book where the text dominate and where you have an object or an image here and there to actually illustrate a point that you want to make in written form. So it is a very different exercise. What we try to do was to show objects that at first sight are visually attractive, even to visitors who have absolutely no knowledge about a popular culture in Congo, because most of our visitors think that they know what so-called traditional objects from Central Africa are about and do not require much information. But they have little or no idea about Congolese popular culture. And I think even that we can say that a lot of them do not even have a particular interest in it, simply because they don't know it. They don't even know that it exists. So to draw them in, I think, you have to show them objects that they can relate to on an aesthetic level, and then on a second level, what you can try to do, and we didn't succeed in it completely, I'm the first to acknowledge, but then again it was the first time that we did it, is actually to try to get them to look at it in different ways, even if it unsettles them. Like, for instance, the Ginzengi masks. I mean, a lot of visitors found the whole idea that this so-called beautiful traditional object actually refers to colonial times, was created during the 1930s in a context, say, of economic exploitation very disturbing. But that is nevertheless the message that we have to get across one way or the other, but it's not at all obvious, that's for sure.
Other questions?
I would also love to say
Paul? Well, hold that, Paul. Hold on to that. Question from the floor? Siraj? Or, yes, please. Is that Siraj?
These discursive objects enter the museum in Nederland, and we think of them as through the notion of the popular. And we've had references to popular culture in various ways. How different would it be if these discursive objects were to enter the museum in Congo? Would that change the debate to be one of public culture?
Can I ask Birgit to answer that? Do you want to try and engage?
My sense is that it is
Johannes'
introduced
yeah.
To Johannes raising Congo, but then I could also follow up.
Well, first of all, they would belong to the Congo. Chibumba's work is a national treasure, and I hope it gets claimed one day.
That's a nice prickling
I think Johannes took it out of the country, as far as I remember.
No, I did not taking out. Let's not get involved in things like that. Let's not forget one thing. Yeah. Way before you got the objects, way before we made an exhibit, Chibumba and I talked. The texts were translated, transcribed, and a book was written. At the time when Chibumba and I interacted, there was not the slightest idea that this would ever end up in a museum. Not the slightest possibility. He was a historian. He wanted to write and paint a history. And all I did was providing some of the material, the possibility of this. So, but this gets us away from it. It should be in the Congo, and I think it would have 10 times the reaction that it had when you exhibited it, which was already great. There was very little written, and you saw people moved, disturbed, having really no idea about African history or things like that. But it was a powerful, because, as I said earlier today, you had the courage. This is an extraordinary curator. Yeah. The usual curator has 100 paintings. He picks out the 20 best and shows them. Paul understood this is a total thing, and he showed it. This museum had the courage to do that. And we know that the reactions were extraordinary. So, and they would be twice, 10 times. If that would be shown in the Congo.
I hope that answers your question, Siraj. Yeah? Paul?
No, I would love to react, because I think both questions for me are very much related. To get back to the question that Johannes asked, what the hell does African popular art does in a museum? But for me, that's also very much, what does African popular art do in a Dutch museum? Because we have been talking, and in that sense, I'm very grateful for the great minds there to really unravel and study and see what these works mean and do, and for effect they have in their local consumers. But when you transport them here, it's a completely different story. The people do not know the context, the background. For them, they tell also stories, but very different stories. And that is exactly the first question. How do you translate that? And I mean, and I feel very much so that after reading Fabian's book, I mean, there is no way that I understand it myself completely, let alone that I can transform this story into a small exhibition text or anything else. So the thing that it does do something to our audience, but a very different thing.
But does
And the question is, how do they relate to each other? I mean, for me, that's really also an open question. Otherwise, we wouldn't have asked this for this debate.
But does Johannes provide an answer to that question by suggesting them as evidence? As evidence, we do not stop studying them. that what we do is that we engage with these objects, and after you have engaged with it and you pass on, there is another engagement with it, and that engagement will actually say that what Paul Faber did was wrong. And what I'm going to do in 2025 is to look a new way at it and engage in another way. So the museum provides a basis for that, for holding that evidence, which can be studied over and over again. And we come up with new imaginations for how to understand and present to very different publics. Does that provide a possible answer to your country?
Yeah, but I'm still more interested not so much in what the next generation of researchers will do with it, but very much in what the works do in communication with the Dutch audience. How do they translate it? And can you somehow find ways to make them itch, at least, you know, that they will not really maybe get into it in the same way as the local audience, but at least get the itch?
Can I ask too, I'm going to give the floor over, but can I ask, did anybody see the exhibition? Yes? Can somebody tell me what did it do for you? And I like the work that the objects do something. They're not just sitting there. What do they do? Can somebody answer that question? How did you engage with it? I like to think of it in terms of proximity, your own proximity to it. Anne-Marie.
It was a very human way for me to connect to that history, to see people in a context I didn't know very much about, but it somehow came close.
Anybody else? One other person who saw it.
I think that is very important. It somehow came close. For, of course, the Chibumba paintings, also Ghanaian movies. Of course, Shiraz, they are part of public culture, but it's of a public culture that is far away and that does not easily reach us through the ordinary channels, although it is public in the sense of öffentlich, open bar, but it is not for everyone. And I think the big question is, what is it that we as anthropologists, but also as a museum, want to convey to audiences, to publics here for whom these things are not obvious? How do we think that these objects might move people, and towards what? And I really think I would insist that these objects come out of modes of making worlds, construing worlds in which people live. And it is one of the big tasks, I think, of a museum like this, to create an awareness of a world we share, indeed, as humans. And so, indeed, it has to make public forms of public culture that are still hanging somewhere, that don't easily come to us. So I would say this is very much what it is all about. And I think there's always, it's important to find a balance, this is much discussed, between, of course, the aesthetic appeal of an object. Of course, this is how you capture people, and contextualization. And I think actually in your permanent Africa exhibition, to which I had to get used to at first, but I visited it often with first-year anthropology students, in the end I think it works quite well, because you have been able to make use of ICT and so on. So there is a lot of context offered, not through text, but through films and all kinds of things. So I think that this is the direction I think we should go in.
Over to the public again. One other question. Oh, first in the back and then here. No, right here, by Siraj, yeah. Yes, you. Yes.
To relate to that, that might be interesting. There's a very interesting film made by one of Bogomil's students, and I forgot her name, from Quebec, on an exposition that was first in Lubumbashi and then in Brussels, in Tervuren. And she confronts, the exposition in Lubumbashi was a lot smaller than in Tervuren, but she confronts the reactions of the public at the two expositions, and of course they're hugely apart. They're completely different and a completely different interest and all that. And it would be very interesting to show at both expositions the film to confront, well, the Dutch audience or the Belgian audience with the reaction in Africa. And I mean, that way you can kind of reflect and kind of mirror reactions. And that could kind of, probably it will not contribute to a sense of common experience, but even to get a sense of the huge differences also already a kind of commonality. That might be an interesting. The film is very interesting. It's easy to find out.
That's a suggestion of how to make it work then, yeah?
Yes, well, no, I think it's a very important suggestion in order to follow up concretely on how you kind of. I think the big problem you're all addressing is that there's a huge gap between. Well, this art really belongs in Africa. It's not in Africa, it's here. So there is a kind of guilt feeling, and I think it's rightful. There is a kind of uneasiness with that. So I think it's very important to make it work in a kind of dialogue between the two audiences. And that's something like film could help, I think.
But I would not say there is a general guilt feeling. Like the stuff I'm working on, these movie posters, I think they can do, they have done a great job. In Africa, they have advertised movies, they have brought people, drawn people into the cinemas, and they have been thrown away. And I think these posters can have a very important
but they can be
task,
on different spaces.
Here. And I think it is very important, although I see what you have in mind.
I think it depends on the art form. Some objects can only be in one place, and other objects can kind of be.
I still think it's very important to also see objects as messengers that talk and address.
As conversation pieces, for example.
Absolutely.
I'm not too sure now, because I haven't seen the film. I'd certainly be very interested whether that was the exhibition Congo Nature and Culture, which was made by Belgian curators, and I think it's very important that we do not look at an exhibition as just a collection of individual objects. I mean, they are put together by a narrative or a storyline, which means that even if the objects, so to speak, all come from the Congo, Belgian curators can end up making an exhibition which is basically Belgian, and so will effectively elicit very different reactions from the Congolese if, as would be the case, if these same objects were curated by a Congolese curator. So we should not talk about the isolated objects, we should really talk about the story that one tries to get across, and it's there indeed, I think, that the challenge lies and that the problems arise.
I think one thing that I find interesting as well at this point is that in a former time when I was much younger as a curator, we used to think that objects were eloquent, that they could speak, that they spoke something, and that they were conversation pieces. Now, what we think is that there is a film that will help the objects to speak. And very often I find that people go and see the film and they never see the objects anymore because the film becomes the object. And it's hard to, finding a way to make as an exhibitionary practice, those two come together, I find is very hard. Your question.
Yeah, and I have a totally different question on exhibitions from other museums. I was remembered when you're talking about objects that should interact with our own experience or our own feelings. I read some weeks ago about this Rothko paintings that are moving people to cry before them as objects of popular or art. And why not take the discussions or the to the more general feeling, I think, in all sorts of museums, how to interact with your audience, and then see that it's not only on African or on popular culture, but it's the whole question on how to interact with your audience, and not by explaining, but by provoking. So is there any contact between those two totally different worlds, I think, of ethnological museums and art museums?
Yeah, you go ahead.
No, sure. Yeah, no, yeah. That We should have several evenings, I think, because they're all quite far-reaching questions. Now, I was thinking on similar lines. Of course, there is a general question. I mean, can you contextualize an object that it tells the same story to everyone? And I think no, never. There will be always an individual response. And I remember also when the whole, let's say, color field painting came up, Barnett Newman, etc. In the beginning, no one had any kind of emotional response, just, you know, kind of big question mark. And I remember that it was Eddie de Wilde, I think, who had many talks about Barnett Newman, and then after 2 years thinking about it and reading about it and studying the Jewish background, he bought 2 pieces for the State Museum, and then he hung it in the major room without any kind of context, and he had, well, you just have to understand it, you know. So, and I think that people now start spontaneously to cry when they see a Rothko. I mean, this is happening after a couple of decades, I think, when this whole connotation and association of potential deep feeling with Rothko is already there, I would say. So, but when people face, let's say, African popular art, they don't have any kind of context to start with. So I think for them it's quite hard to analyze it the way a Congolese would do it. So you have your own frame of mind. And in a museum, the only thing you can do is you give elements of food for thought, that they slowly, I think, digest it in a more complete way. Because for me, any artwork, a Rothko or an African popular artwork, is a door to step into another mind. That makes it, for me, fascinating. But sometimes you take the wrong door. So in that case, you know, you need tools.
I think that we have to close now, and I think it is true, we need tools, and I think a part of what we call new museology, but a lot of museology over the last 20 years has been trying to address exactly that. How do we provide people with the tools to try and engage, to be more proximate to things that they don't know? How do you engage with audiences and try? And I think that there is a cross-dialogue between different museums struggling with the same kinds of practice to know, and we are a part of that practice as well. So it is true, and I think while we frame this around Africa and popular art, this is only framed within the framework of this book that we are launching. But when we discuss, and this is an advertisement, when we discuss photography in March next year, we are going to talk about photography in this museum, but how it engages with other museums as well. So yes, to your answer, there is a cross-dialogue. I'd like to say thanks. I have a lot of questions that I wanted to ask, but I can't ask anymore because we have a reception. To close, can I just, yeah, the reception, yeah, we have technology that helps us here. I'd like to just ask Johannes one question, because one of the things that's working in a museum that I feel I struggle with is sometimes I feel that the academic side of museum work has been taken away, that it is now in universities, and that we don't get as museums the opportunity to really research and use the evidence that you speak of. Go to the evidence room and use it in an intellectual way. Do you see the museum as still that intellectual space that can engage in the popular? Is it possible for the museum to be that kind of place still today?
Yeah, well, you remember I called it a refuge, but I'm an outsider to these things. That's in my mind. What I'm saying, well, if I look at the present state of research at the universities, a museum would look pretty good to me to do my work in, you know. You know, one last word to a question to when your director introduced us all. I think he's no longer here.
Yeah.
What is the development relevance of all of this here? And if you don't come up with an answer to that, what are you doing in the kit?
Well,
that was a question I asked myself, yeah, and I have an answer.
Oh, you have an answer?
Yeah.
Yes, great.
Probably not one that will be very popular. All the stuff, the serious work, all these labors. You know, when I transcribe a text, it takes an hour to bring 1 minute into shape. Thousands of hours. What is this for? It's for developing my mind. I am the object of development, or we collectively. We have the obligation to develop our rationality, to develop our knowledge of the world, to develop our understanding what it is to be human. And that is, in my view, the best contribution we can make to development anywhere. That's a nice way to end this.
It is a perfect way to end it. Well, thank you. Thank you, Professor Fabian, Professor Maya, and Dr. Kuipens. Thank you, Paul. Thanks to you all for coming. And